have this new album, Bringing It Down to the Bass. I listened to it a couple of times. It's such a cool record. I love your barbershop quartet for side B, and then it's like a completely different album. And in the press release, you said that you were saving all of your prog stuff for another album, but that second half of the album is very, prog-ish. So I'd love to just get your sort of commentary here about what this album is and, what people can expect with these two halves of it.
Oh, sure. Thank you for listening and paying attention and caring about it. It's been great fun writing it over a long period of time, recording it. And the most fun for me was getting the players that I dreamed might best fulfill what I had in mind when I wrote the piece. And it's a variety, it's a cast of players. Generally, when I've done albums before, I get your rhythm section and do the whole album with them, and then maybe add a few people. But this is a completely different process and fun for me. And, when you do a record, you get to hear it a lot in mixing and living with it. And when I hear it, the things that get me excited are surprise riffs that the drummers did and solos that the sax player or guitar player took. So that's it. About the barbershop quartet, had to throw one of those in. It's my record, and I've been a fan of barbershop since I was a kid. And incidentally, I talked Peter Gabriel in his first album and his first tour into doing a barbershop quartet intro to one of his pieces. So in a way, like a lot of the record, is a hearkening back to my history in music.
This is side B of your album, the one you listen to after a little break, the one you come to from a different place.
And I don't feel like the pieces after that are actually prog, because you should hear the ones that I took that I didn't use on the record, which are 12-minute instrumentals, which don't feature the bass at all. And in the process of making a record, I guess you make decisions about which pieces are most appropriate. And I had doubled the number of compositions that I wanted on the album, and it was quite a ways into it before I decided, okay, this is 2 albums and 2 different themes. So this one is about the bass, and each piece, almost all the pieces started with a bass riff or a bass sound or a technique, the fingernail or funk fingers or something like that, or stick playing, of course. But that's not really, in the end, what the piece is about, because I added other players, and hopefully the compositions are good. A lot of fun making it, and it is hard to pigeonhole as genre, so I'm inventing a new genre called the bass. This is the genre of bass, but it has really good players on it.
Yeah, the players are incredible. Obviously, you have such a roster of, you've played with everyone. You have an entire song just dedicated to the drummers that you've played with over your career.
Steve Jordan, Steve Ferroni, Steve Martell, Tobias Bruford, Bill Bruford, Brian Blade, Billy Cobham, Brian Blade, Billy Cobham, Bill Bruford, Bill Bruford, Bill Bruford, Mike Portnoy, and Narada, Michael Walden, Bruford, Bill Bruford.
Some of the techniques are really interesting, and I'm glad to hear and see you exploring the bass still, trying to find new pockets of things. And in fact, Dean Pascarella, he asked if you discovered any new techniques or approaches specifically, in the preparation for this album.
That's a great question, and thanks, Dean, for that. Leave it to Dean to ask that question.
Yeah.
I think somewhat, but more than that, I explored more deeply some techniques I had done. For instance, hammer-on playing, which is the first piece, bringing it down to the bass, is on the bass, but it's playing it like it's a Chapman stick, which, for those who don't know, is touch style. You play one note with each hand. Sorry, I don't have the bass here to demonstrate it, but I've done that a lot. Actually, it was my doing that annoyingly in studio sessions in the 70s that led to a lot of people telling me about this new instrument in the mid-70s, the Chapman stick, when Emmett Chapman had invented an instrument to be played with that technique. And that's why I got the stick in the first place. It worked out well for me because partly it wasn't too too big an adjustment because I played with that technique on the bass. But also soon after, when I joined King Crimson, the Chapman stick, with its unusual tuning and its unusual sound, became the best tool for me to become a progressive player like the other guys in this band, King Crimson, that I suddenly was exposed to. So that worked out well. So yes, I recently remembered a piece, John Lennon piece on Double Fantasy, Cleanup Time, it's called, where I played with almost the same riff. And he heard it and said, "Oh, let's start the piece with that." I had forgotten that, but not the same riff, but the same technique of back and forth playing is the basis of bringing it down to the bass. There's also, I like fingernail playing, what I call fingernail playing, with a fingernail, but also with one thumb on the right hand, doing harmonics that vary. I think guitar players do it all the time with a pick. So I haven't done that much, but I practiced it a lot and brought it out for a solo on Espresso Bill. A piece where I celebrated that I drink probably too much espresso in the morning, and that's a piece I started off and ended with my espresso machine. Had fun recording it and making a loop out of it.
Yeah, some of the lyrics on the album are actually pretty humorous, and there were a couple of tracks. Maybe it was the cello one. I have so many notes, but I think it was the cello one where you are. I couldn't believe it was you. I think you were like reading a poem or something, but it didn't sound like you. It was like this gnarly, nasty kind of. I
got a cello that's electric. Just had to have it, don't know why. I never sit down and practice the thing. Just plug it in and let it fly.
Your vocal explorations, can you talk a little about that? Because I don't think anyone associates you as a vocalist, but there's lots of vocals where you are singing on this record.
There are vocals, and I don't think of myself as a vocalist, so we're in sync on that. And that one is actually my regular voice of kind of yelling at the guys, give the cello some. Anyway, I've done songs through the years. I feel like my voice is fine, quite okay for background vocals, but I tend to not want to do the lead on anything. But sometimes you get an idea of something you want to say aside from musically. I do write a lot of poetry and keep journals, and sometimes you just move to put it on your record. And if you're not a huge record seller who sells singles, it's not a problem once fans forgive you, or maybe they get into it. That's an example of the side B, Turn It Over Barbershop Quartet, and an entirely vocal piece that took me the whole lockdown year to write, with the names, just only the names of drummers I played with, a lot of drummers, and an interesting composition. So if I have something to say lately, because I'm on the road with Stickman a lot, mostly shouting or spoken words because my voice gives out. It'll be interesting on the Beat Tour. We'll talk about that, how my voice holds out for the background vocals. So I tried a few vocal ideas, and mostly it's saying what I want to say, except the piece, Give the Cello Some, the piece you chose, is quite an exception from the record. It's not an elaborate composition. It's almost not a jam, but a blues, and I suddenly shout, "Let's give the cello some," and it breaks down to just the cello. And when I say the cello, I mean the Steinberg electric, the NS, made by Ned Steinberger, the NS electric cello, which sounds a lot like a guitar, like a fretless guitar, because I kind of rock out on it. And I thought, I didn't put a lot of time into that composition. Let me rock out on the cello.
There's a lot of rocking out on this album. It's fairly bluesy, but I was surprised at how heavy it was. There's a lot of distorted bass and hard-hitting drums, and I loved the whole feel of it. I thought it was great. But I was also just surprised at how hard it goes. I thought that was pretty cool. Is that the kind of music that just sort of arises from you?
Well, for sure. And I thought of it as a heavy rock album until I put in some lighter pieces, kind of went the other way around. There's one piece called Boston Rocks where I long have wanted, actually I introduced the part of the compositional material to Stickman a long time ago when it became a different piece. But Boston, the town I'm from, kind of has especially revolving around sports. It's a heavy, rugged town. And that's fine. But then there's this intellectual, historic side of it. A lot of universities there. And I thought, well, let me use my prog sensibility and combine those two things into one piece. Kind of yelling, rock, rock. And then going into the historical thing with some JFK quotes, because he's also from Boston and spoke a lot about Boston. So, compositions are an adventure. And if you succeed, you get to express what you wanted to express, and hopefully at least some of the listeners learn from it and enjoy the experience.
Yeah, so talk a little about your composition and your approach, because some of these songs are so complex. They must be written out. And I was, just as someone who records music myself, I was thinking, wow, how many tracks of different things are on this? Because there's a lot of where you're singing, especially the barbershop pieces or the parts where there's a lot of layered vocals. There's a lot of tracking going on, and it's very complex. So I was wondering, like, do you write all of this out, or are you doing it, sort of section by section? And how much of what is on this album is actually written out or notated, in the computer?
Very good question. It varies a whole lot. The extreme of written out is that piece with the names of the drummers called On the Drums, which is, I sing those words at the end. Aside from that, it's only names of drummers. And I had, in the lockdown year, once I got it in my head that I have to do this composition, I just have to do it. And around my studio were scraps of paper with, okay, these Kaliuta, or Bozio, a couple of drummers' names who would go together into a section, but musically it was all over the place, and it was always written out. But maybe I have a photo of it. I'll share that with you, Anthony, of maybe 20 or 30 different sheets of paper written at different times, and then became the job of how to bring it together into one composition, which I somehow succeeded, but I had the whole year to do that.
Omar, Happy, Carmine, Pete, Jenny, Nick, Mason, Ellen White, Chad Weckerman, Gary, Gar, Parker, Joe O'Brien, Howard Van Sorgen, Omar, Happy, Carmine, Pete, Jenny, Nick, Mason, Ellen White, Peter Erskine, Randy, Charlante, Matt Apps, Nick Rich, Claudio Fossati.
And then some pieces, I'm just riding in the car and I get an idea and either record a few bars of it or just pull over and write a few notes and I'll remember it. Some of these are not jam, they're blues based. And some of the compositions changed as I recorded them. I'll tell you, there's one called Road Dogs, instrumental, where I aimed at, I had this musical idea, I'm going to play with the funk fingers on the bass, and then I'm going to take that electric cello and make it sound really like a blues guitar, instrumental. And then when I got to, it kind of went where it went compositionally. I think I laid the bass down within mind what's going to happen later, and then I filled it in with demo parts to be played later by the other players. And then it kind of broke down into a 12/8 blues thing. Okay, that's just kind of where it went. And as I was playing the bass, just recording the bass alone to a click probably, I thought, something I've always wanted to do was fretless bass through a vocoder. I thought that'd be cool here, really, a vocoder type thing, because the fretless bass almost sounds like a voice anyway, and I don't think I've ever heard anybody do that. Okay, so I'm thinking that, and I'm playing that. Oh, I get the idea. I got the melody. I'll just put a marker down, and I had it pulled over a microphone and sang "Road Dogs," and I tried to make my voice sound like I imagined the fretless through a vocoder was then "Road Dogs," nothing but road dogs. So I recorded that.
Road dogs were nothing but road dogs. Road dogs were nothing but.
Fast forward a month or 2 months, and I'm trying every piece of equipment I can get, and it just sounded terrible. It just it was one of those ideas. It just I didn't have the way to make it sound any good. And the more I heard that vocal, I thought, you know what? I'm just going to stay with that vocal. And it became a vocal. It was an instrumental, and it was the marker for the instrumental idea that made it a vocal. So I liked it. On this album, I was free, and I took my time, years really, to let the compositions go where they wanted to go.
Cool. So there are a couple pieces that I definitely want to bring attention to, especially given what people on my channel are going to be attracted to, the weirder tracks. So you've got this track called Floating in Dark Waters that uses a Robert Fripp soundscape. And this must have been the same era where Robert was recording Sometimes God Hides, because a lot of the sounds, there's a soundscape on that album called Radiophonic 2, and there's a lot of very similar textures and effects happening. I think there's some similarity to some soundscapes happening on Thrack as well. But you mentioned in the press release that you would play along with some of his soundscapes before a show began. And listening to this track, I just thought, how on earth did these things come together? Like this, because as you mentioned, some of his soundscapes are atonal. And listening to what you added on this, I just thought, was this just total experimentation? Was this, where did this musical idea come from in terms of what you and Jerry added to it?
Thanks. It's a rare thing for me where I felt like I missed the boat back when we were touring actively with King Crimson, and Robert, as you know, he would start out the before the show, he would get a soundscape going, and sometimes he asked me to just go out and as we all went out, he said, "Tony, just join in," and I did. And at the end of one of the tours, not the last tour, but at the end of one of them, excuse me, Robert said, "Why don't you take some soundscapes, record bass to them, and we can use that somewhere." And when I say I missed the boat, I just kind of was busy, and there were a million soundscapes. And I got busy, and I never did that. Okay, so fast forward, and it's my own album. And I said to Robert, I emailed him, I think. I said, "You mind if I do that and take one of your soundscapes and finally do that bass to it?" So that's what I did. I don't even know where I got the soundscape, but I took it, and I had a musical, very simple bass melody in mind that seemed appropriate to equally coexist with a very eerie atonal soundscape, and that's what I did. And as it went a little bit into rhythm, the bass is not the main thing; it's mostly Robert. But as it went a little bit into rhythm, I changed my thinking about it and thought it could use a little percussion. So I asked my friend Jerry Morata to play only the last bit. Essentially, I started out thinking it'll be a duet, and it ended up a trio.
It's a very cool piece. I I listened to it a couple of times just because I found it so surprising. And that's something that I love, the creativity, and there's just a lot of musical surprises on this album. You quote a Barrios song, which is a classical piece that I play.
Great piece.
Oh my goodness, it's so beautiful. But you reharmonize the chords. You take kind of the beginning of a section and then it becomes yours. So you're quoting and then you're sort of doing a variation on this theme. And I love how surprising, you know, out of nowhere, there's a cello solo. Out of nowhere, there's a Barrios quote. Yeah, I don't know. Just respond to that.
Well, thanks for the compliment. And
I could write his name in fire across the sky for all to find. But it's there, inside his music. I feel the pieces of his soul. He left behind.
that's another one where I let things go the way they wanted to go. It was a poem that I long wanted to put to music, and I was on a writing retreat, you might call it, in Berlin on an Airbnb, just to be alone with my Chapman stick and away from home. And it came together, and I was feeling great about it, and I let it go where it went. I don't think I was recording it. I just was remembering what I did. And it went into the quote of the Barrios piece. And I do that sometimes, and I am aware, maybe you do it too, and I think, okay, later I got to change this because it's the piece. It's another piece. And I kind of was working out how I can play it. And then later I said, well, this record, I'm just going to not be afraid. I'm just going to do it. Not a crime to do that. And I didn't know until you told me that I didn't get the quote exactly, because I was just doing it from memory. It's a long time had passed since I heard the piece. But on a normal record of mine, I would then go back and do something like that, but change it. And this time I felt, just afraid is the wrong word, but I'm going to not be so careful. I'm going to let the music dictate where it goes.
Well, I'd hate to be thought of as saying that you didn't do it right. That's certainly not the case. I just thought it was beautiful.
I'm pleased if I changed it. That's fine. I played it the way I remembered it went.
Yeah, and actually, I think that's a fun part of composition, because sometimes you hear something and then you kind of go wherever you want with it.
Absolutely.
And that's where it's great. It's like a little prompt or an essay or something. Somebody gives you one line and then you have free expression after that. I do want to ask about on the drums piece. Are you a Gentle Giant fan? Have you listened to much Gentle Giant? No, okay.
And if I quoted them, it was by accident.
No, it wasn't a quote. It's this. They were another band that did a lot of similar vocal pieces, and so I was wondering if you were inspired at all by them. Very complex, multi-layer, 4 guys singing, 5 guys singing, all different parts.
Wow. No,
yeah.
I've been told that I unwittingly quoted Queen for one phrase. And building the chord going down vocally. Yes, I did.
Okay.
That was fair.
Yeah. So the last thing I want to ask about is, before we get to beat stuff in the last few minutes, the David Torn stuff on bungee bass. His solo is insane. His guitar parts are always so creative, but I listened to this and I was like, wow, Tony just said go for it or something. Just let him do his thing, right?
sure. And David is a unique player, wonderful player. We have a lot of history, been in bands together, done shows live together, composed together, and yeah, that's a perfect example of where you, in a perfect world musically, you get the guy you want on your piece and let him do what he does, and don't rein him in at all. And I knew it would go pretty far out, and I enjoyed that me and Pat Mastelotto were going to really hold things pretty simple. And I also had the idea of my being a string quartet and coming in and out by 4 overdubs with cello and bass. Not really to interfere with what David did, but just coming in and out in a section. My conception of that was to do a boring quarter note part, like studio string players would have, but to have the string quartet players really get pissed off about it. So that's what I had in mind I played them one at a time, of course, and I'd start playing, and then I'd just get bugged and just made myself get bugged and play different stuff and have it kind of fall apart in a screwy way. I didn't need people to know that. This is the first time I've mentioned that to anybody, but it seemed appropriate for the piece not to play a completely together quarter notes on a string quartet.
Yeah. Did you, was this tracked together? Like, were songs done in the same room, or was it all kind of separate and then you pulled it all together? And did you provide direction for people?
All separate. I wasn't able to, especially because I recorded over years. But yeah, all separate. And I can think of only a few examples where I suggested anything to anybody. On the piece, Me and My Axe, where I got Steve Hunter, my old bandmate, the Deacon, to play this wonderful, really a duet between fretless and his blues guitar. On synthesizer, really, and Jerry Murata, a collection of Peter Gabriel band alumni, and I laid down the melody and said, "Do what you want, but here's the melody I had in mind." And he kind of stuck to what I did, and he changed it appropriately and made it better. So mostly, I didn't say anything to the guys. The exception is the horn players. When there were horn parts, my brother Pete is a great arranger and keyboard player, and I gave him, here's what I have in mind on the keyboard, three voices, and then he improved it and wrote it in a way that works for horn players, which I don't know about. I don't know how to do that.
Well, it sounds great, and he did a great job. Okay, so let's talk a little about Beat. You're rehearsing this week, and you're hitting the road real soon. How are things going?
It's going very well. Rehearsals are fine. I think that my Chapman stick is behind me on the couch because before talking to you and after talking to you, I need to practice some of this stuff. Revisiting the Crimson parts from the 80s, I thought, well, this is going to be not easy as falling off a log, but not heavy lifting for me. And I was wrong. I did some pretty tricky stuff and some counter cross time signatures that I forgot that I was into that at that time. And my fingers having forgotten it in all these years since then, it's some work to get back into that, but I try to appreciate that for Steve Vai and for Danny Carey, it's a lot more heavy lifting because they didn't play it in the first place, and they've done a wonderful job. We've only rehearsed a few days at this point, and they're ready. They learned the stuff. They did a tremendous amount of work. Adrian and I are okay with the material, so we have a lot more rehearsal time. We really want to be a polished band by the time we hit the road for the first show, so we allowed ourselves the time to really get it right. Everything good so far.
Now, I think about it, you've played this music for decades. You've got the camp. You've played in Stickmen. But it's clear like you really enjoy this music. I'm just curious, like, how do you feel? Is this a new experience for you, or is this kind of like we're trying this thing again, and I'm excited to play through it? You know, like what's your experience playing with this new band, this music that's been under your fingers and that you've been doing for so long?
Very good question. The bottom line will be the first show, September 12th, I think it is. That's when we'll all find out really what it's like on stage. The rehearsing is one thing, but an appropriate question, because revisiting the music of the '80s, the King Crimson music, I do it every year at camp, and we do play some of those pieces with Stickmen and other bands. I play jazz versions with my brother and Levin brothers. So revisiting that music I'm fine with that, but it's not what excites me. What makes my mouth water musically, am I mixing parts of my ear? What makes my ears water is hearing where it goes with Steve Vai and Danny Carey. And I know what Adrian and I can do with the pieces that we've been playing. Let me say that that's only half of the material from the '80s, and now that I'm encountering the other half, the ones we haven't played since the '80s, or I haven't, or some of them we hardly played then, even live. That's a whole other experience. So what excites me is seeing where it's going to go musically, how it's going to be different than that band in the '80s. That band was great, and how I'm going to react to the other guys. And I don't know exactly yet. You can rehearse quite a bit, but it's in the shows that we'll find out the real magic of where it's going to go with this particular quartet of players.
Any surprises or any sort of moments that really took you off guard?
Not yet. We're early in rehearsals, and mostly it's fighting with equipment and trying to get your pedal board to do what you needed to do. Maybe I'd say the two guitar players each have minimum 20 pedals. Me, I only have one multi-unit, but it's not set up right for each piece. So I spend the piece, half of it, on my knees, twiddling knobs and trying to get it right. That's the necessary work of being able to I don't know how long it'll be, but maybe a week from now, we'll start really running the set and trying different running orders, and then it'll be musically hinting at what it's going to be.